My name is Jason Burke, and in 2024 my wife and I bought a beautiful home from an estate sale. The real estate agent said the previous owners had moved unexpectedly. We didn't question it until our dog started digging near a patch of soft earth behind the fence. The first thing we found was a thick metal wall. When you buy a house from an estate sale, you tell yourself you're getting a good deal, not inheriting someone else's unfinished story. That's what I told myself when my wife, Hannah, and I closed on the beige two-bedroom home in Clovis, California. We'd been renting for years, scraping by, dreaming of a place we could actually call our own. When we found this one, the small front porch, the tidy lawn, the neighborhood kids riding bikes down the cul-de-sac, it felt like we'd found peace. But there was something quiet about the house. Not the comforting kind of quiet. More like a silence that waited for you to make the first noise. We moved in on a Saturday. By Monday, our dog, Rufus, had already picked a favorite spot in the yard. The back right corner, near the old fence. He'd scratch and dig there every afternoon until Hannah would call him in. At first, we laughed it off. Probably moles, we thought. But 2 weeks later, after an early rain softened the ground, Rufus came back to the porch covered in wet dirt, whining in that low, confused way dogs do when they've found something they don't understand. When I went to see, I noticed the hole he'd made was deeper than I expected, maybe 1.5 feet. The earth had caved in slightly, revealing something solid, gray and flat. When I brushed off the dirt, I felt cold metal. At first, I thought it might be an old septic lid or a storm drain cap. But as I cleared more of the soil, I realized it wasn't round. It was rectangular, and it didn't end, even after 3-4 feet of scraping. It was part of something much bigger. That night, I told Hannah. She frowned, more curious than scared. "Maybe it's one of those old shipping containers," she said. "People used them as bunkers or storage sometimes." I laughed it off, but her words stuck in my head. A few Google searches later, I found forum threads about Cold War-era fallout shelters, some buried right under suburban homes built in the 70s. Still, I didn't think much of it. Until the next day. When I came home from work, there was an envelope on our porch. No address, no stamp. Just our names written in shaky black ink. Inside was a single sheet of paper. It said, "If you found it, leave it alone." That's when the piece we'd bought started to unravel. At first, Hannah thought it was a prank, maybe from a neighbor or a bored teenager. But I knew it wasn't. The handwriting looked too deliberate, too desperate. I asked around the neighborhood, but nobody had seen anyone leave the envelope. The house to our left belonged to a retired couple named the Schmidts. They said they'd lived there for nearly 30 years. When I mentioned the previous owners, their expressions changed. "You mean the young couple?" Mr. Schmidt asked, lowering his voice. "Emily and Tyler James. Nice folks. Bought the place in 2019, I think. Fixed it up a bit. Then, well, they left suddenly." "Left?" I asked. "As in moved?" Mrs. Schmidt shook her head. "That's what the police said. But," she hesitated, "they didn't take their things. Furniture was still there. Even the cars." I remember Hannah gripping my hand tighter as the words sank in. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through old local news archives. It took me hours, but I finally found it. A short article from 2019. Local couple missing, Emily, 29, and Tyler James, 31, were last seen leaving their home on August 12th. Their phones were later found inside the residence. Authorities have no suspects at this time. No follow-up articles. No updates. Just silence. By morning, I'd made up my mind. I called the police, explained what I'd found, and asked if they could send someone to take a look. They sent a young officer named Deputy Caleb Porter. He took notes, looked at the metal patch in the yard, and shook his head. "Sir, unless you find something that looks like human remains or direct evidence, this is private property. You're free to dig, but we can't get involved." So I dug. Hannah wasn't happy about it. She said I was letting it get under my skin. But once you start pulling at a thread like that, it's hard to stop. Every layer of dirt I removed felt like peeling back the years between now and whatever had happened here. By the third evening, I'd uncovered enough to see what it was. The top of a shipping container, about 8 feet wide, buried maybe 4 feet down. Its sides were rusted but intact. The paint had long faded, leaving streaks of red and gray. Then I found the latch. It was sealed shut with a heavy lock, crusted with dirt and corrosion. I tried hitting it with a hammer. No luck. I tried a bolt cutter. It barely dented. Finally, I gave up and called Caleb again, told him I might have found an underground structure on a property tied to a missing persons case. This time, he came back with backup. When the lock finally gave, the doors creaked open, and the smell that came out wasn't something I'll ever forget. A mix of rust, mold, and something older. Inside, the walls were lined with torn insulation. Burn marks covered the back corners. There was an old camping chair, melted plastic, and a pile of soaked papers that might have once been a binder. The officers took photos, marked the area, and called forensics. By the next morning, the backyard was a crime scene. They found no bodies. But they did find something else. A set of keys, still on a chain, and under a loose floor panel, a small box containing a flash drive wrapped in plastic. It took a few weeks before I heard from the detectives. By then, the story had hit local news again. Cold case reopened, evidence found at home of missing couple. Detective Marisol Grant, who led the renewed investigation, called me personally. She said they'd managed to retrieve files from the flash drive, audio recordings and scans of handwritten notes. She wouldn't say much, only that the couple had been documenting something strange they'd found while doing backyard renovations years earlier. When I asked what exactly they'd found, she paused before saying, "It wasn't theirs, and it wasn't supposed to be there." Months passed. The investigation dragged on. Hannah hated how consumed I'd become, reading every update, replaying every sound from the past few months in my head. Then one evening, there was a knock at the door. It was Detective Grant again, holding a folder. She said the case had reached its conclusion, or as close as it ever would. Inside the folder were printed transcripts of the flash drive contents. The recording started in June 2019. The first few were harmless. Emily and Tyler talking about home repairs, planning to install a garden bed, complaining about the heat. Then on July 2nd, Tyler's voice changed. "I think we found something under the fence line. It's metal. Emily thinks it's an old bunker. I'm not sure. The weird thing is, there's a vent pipe that runs deeper. Like, it connects to something." A week later, "We opened it today. There's a metal container down there, old, rusted. It smells like chemicals. Inside there are glass jars, all labeled, numbers, dates, some with names. I don't understand any of it." Then, silence for almost a month. The final recording was short, only 30 seconds. Emily's voice, panicked. "There's someone watching the house. Tyler thinks I'm overreacting, but I saw a man by the fence again last night. If something happens, please tell my parents we didn't run away." That was it. No explanation, no goodbye. Detective Grant explained the rest. The jars they described had been part of a Cold War-era experiment, a psychological containment study conducted on civilians who'd volunteered for stress isolation trials in the 1970s. The shelter had been sealed and supposedly decommissioned decades ago, but not everything had been removed. Some records, and apparently biological samples, remained buried in that shipping container. Someone had made sure it stayed that way. The department found traces of accelerant inside the container, meaning it had been set on fire from the inside, likely to destroy evidence. They never confirmed who was responsible or what exactly was being hidden. The files related to that experiment had long since been classified, but the fingerprints found on the flash drive case didn't match either Emily or Tyler. They belonged to a man named Lawrence Keating, a former subcontractor for a federal research facility who had died in 2020. Grant looked me in the eye before leaving and said, "Sometimes, Jason, justice isn't about arrests. Sometimes it's about remembrance." After she left, I sat on the porch, watching Rufus chase fireflies in the yard, the same patch that had changed everything. Hannah came out, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders, and said quietly, "You should tell their story. Let people know what happened here." So that's what I did. I planted a small flower garden in that corner of the yard, right above where the container once lay. Every spring it blooms, wild flowers in colors Emily probably would have loved. Sometimes, when the wind shifts just right, I can almost hear their laughter echo through the fence, faint but alive. What would you have done if you were in my shoes? Kept digging or tried to forget? Subscribe if you believe every truth eventually surfaces.